Another year, another lens through which to reflect on some capital C cinema. And what better way to start 2025 than by revisiting David Fincher's neo-noir classic that brings the medieval to the modern, Seven. I tell ya, this movie hasn't aged a day. In fact, in light of recent events, the film feels not just enduring, but strikingly relevant. As I watch the investigation of John Doe, the highly educated enigma who uses symbolic acts of violence to condemn a corrupt and apathetic society, I couldn't help but think, didn't this just happen? In December, Ivy Leaguer Luigi Mangione gunned down United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, leaving behind a backpack full of Monopoly money and bullet casings engraved with the words "Deny, Depose, and Defend." The act wasn't just about ridding the world of an alleged parasite. It was a calculated spectacle, a violent critique of American healthcare wrapped in symbolic moral messaging. Luigi has dominated headlines and meme pages for over a month now, and on some corners of the internet, he's even been canonized as a sort of folk hero, with netizens not so secretly thanking him.
And after him, I picked the lawyer, and you both must have secretly been thanking me for that one.
The event seems to have reignited public outrage at the injustices of for-profit healthcare. It's not so different from John Doe's project with the 7 deadly sins. Only by orchestrating gruesome murders infused with symbolic messages of biblical judgment can he reawaken a world that's grown numb to moral degradation. So what does it say about our contemporary moment if such extreme measures prove effective at inspiring us to confront society's failures? Well, this is exactly the question Fincher's masterpiece wrestles with. In a world where people have given up the fight for justice, do we perhaps need violent spectacles of moral judgment to jolt us out of complacency? And what does this reveal about the true architect of our collective ethical framework? Well, to find out, we're going to have to dive deep into the case of Mills, Somerset, and Doe, and also brush up on a little medieval theology. Let's dive in. But first, a quick recap. It's Detective Somerset's final week before he hangs up his gun and badge for good. He's about to pass the torch to his newly transferred partner, Detective Mills, when the city is rocked by a string of grisly murders, each meticulously staged to represent one of the 7 deadly sins. With only cryptic literary references left at the crime scenes, the detectives delve into Christian texts on the 7 deadly sins, a trail that eventually leads them to the killer's front door. Though he escapes, the detectives identify him as John Doe, an educated but deranged man who sees his murders as a moral commentary on a world drowning in sin, meant to inspire repentance. 5 murders in, John Doe unexpectedly surrenders, claiming there are still 2 sins left, envy and wrath, that will complete his masterpiece. He strikes up a deal, trading his surrender for the opportunity to show Mills and Somerset the bodies. Doe leads the detectives to a remote location where he confesses to envying Mills' normal married life, when all of a sudden, a mysterious box is delivered.
What's in the box?
Turns out it's Mrs. Mills' head. Consumed by wrath, Mills kills the envious Doe, completing Doe's project. As Mills gets carted off in a squad car, Somerset vows to stay on the force and continue fighting for justice, even in a bleak world. The end. So let's start with John Doe's mission, to use his murders as a form of moral sermonizing, to remind people of the severity of sin.
He's preaching. His murders are his sermons to us.
To do this, he builds off the work of previous religious leaders who, rather than just reciting dry scripture to an audience, came up with something more catchy, something more salient to grab the attention of a population who were at risk of no longer caring: the 7 deadly sins. The unnamed city Fincher depicts is one in which people have entirely stopped caring. There's not only physical neglect, with windows opaque with filth, but also moral neglect. People peddle in smut and violence with a sense of detachment.
Do you like what you do for a living?
No, I don't. But that's life, isn't it?
And crime is so arbitrary in its cruelty that Somerset can't begin to understand it anymore.
I don't understand this place.
It's always dark, rainy, and grimy. Shots are imbued with a sickly green that evokes decay, and overall it feels like a modern-day Sodom and Gomorrah, a fallen state brought about by the neglect of its people and its institutions. Throughout the film, institutional powers are characterized as corrupt and cynical. In one of the first lines of the movie, we hear a cop shrugging off the irrelevant detail of whether or not a child saw his parents murder each other.
It's always these questions with you. The kids see it. Who gives a f? He's dead.
Cops play with rubber balls at crime scenes, play cards at their post, and briberies are commonplace.
They pay police for the information, and they pay well.
At the heart of this slow creep of apathy is Somerset himself. Disillusioned with the prospect of achieving justice, he's on the verge of quitting the force at the beginning. He even uses a metronome as white noise to drown out the chaos happening outside because he's resigned to the fact that he can't do anything about it. Even when faced with the obvious urgency of John Doe's first murder, he wants nothing to do with it.
I can't get involved in this.
So, in response to an apathetic world, John Doe takes a page, or well, many pages, from Christian thinkers of the past who were similarly concerned with combating indifference, and revives the original utility of the 7 deadly sins as vivid moral warnings.
The sins were used in medieval sermons and used as teaching tools.
Initially known as the 8 evil thoughts, the list was refined to the 7 deadly sins, or capital vices, by Pope Gregory I in the 6th century. During the medieval era, the 7 deadly sins were most commonly communicated through sermons. It was an oral, communal culture where people took their moral instruction through such shared religious rituals. For example, the parson in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, a key text in Mills and Somerset's investigation, was an embodiment of this.
Yeah, like in the Parson's Tale.
The parson was a humble preacher who used simple language to guide people toward virtue and away from the 7 deadly sins. But John Doe is not the parson. It's not the medieval times, and he doesn't have a congregation eager to absorb his words. He, like thinkers in the late medieval and early Renaissance period, needed to find a more imaginative way to engage people's attention. See, the sermon was much more effective in a time when most everyone shared common religious values and the church had absolute authority. As Europe moved toward the Renaissance, things started to change. People became less reliant on the church, literacy and humanism expanded, and new ways of delivering moral guidance, like allegory, began to emerge. Rather than simply dictating moral rules, ideas like sin, virtue, and redemption could be made much more impactful if they were weaved into captivating, symbolically rich stories. Enter 2 of John Doe's biggest inspirations, Dante and Milton. But before we get into Dante, I want to tell you about this video's sponsor, Ground News. Like it or not, the news we consume has a profound impact on how we perceive reality, and with so many agendas competing to influence us, it's crucial to have the right tools to uncover bias and avoid echo chambers, and Ground News is just the ticket. Ground News compiles articles from over 50,000 sources across the world and enables you to compare how different sources are covering the same story, so you can cut through the spin and focus on the facts. For every article, they show you the publication's political bias, factual accuracy, and even who owns the outlet, so you know whose interests they're protecting. For example, 140 publications covered the story of supporters creating a fund for Luigi Mangione, and the details provided by Ground News reveal some very telling insights. The US Sun, a right-leaning conglomerate owned by the billionaire Murdoch family, calls his supporters ghoulish, whereas the left-leaning government-owned CBC News focuses on the reasons behind his glorification. With this important context made easily visible, you can feel better equipped to form your own opinion on controversial issues. So protect yourself from bias by going to ground.news/Jared. If you sign up through the link in the description, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all features. Ground News is the best, so give them a try. And now, back to the show.
Fucking Dante. Goddamn poetry writing piece of shit.
Dante's Divine Comedy is perhaps the most important work of the Christian imaginary, a poetic telling of doctrine that takes the Christian moral order and articulates it in a hierarchical structure encompassing sin, purgation, and salvation. Through Dante and Virgil's journey, readers could engage with Christianity in a way that was more engaging. They could reflect on their place within the divine order and be inspired to pursue virtue. At the library, Somerset prints a copy of Dante's Divine Architecture and pores over pages of demonic imagery inspired by such allegorical works. This is why the film's color palette is dominated by desaturated browns, yellows, and grays. It evokes the aged pages of medieval manuscripts that use allegory and illustration to communicate the gravity of sin. Like Dante, John Doe's theatrical killings are meant to strike people's imaginations and use it as a vehicle for moral reflection. His murders are inspired by Dante's concept of contrapasso, punishment that mirrors the nature of the sin committed, or as John Doe puts it,
To turn each sin against the sinner.
for example, the gluttonous in Hell's third circle are forced to wallow in mud and filth, symbolizing their indulgence, or the lustful in the second circle are swept endlessly in a storm to reflect how they were ragdolled by their passions in life. Doe's killings are designed to personify the sinner's sin in the same fashion. The gluttonous fat man has to eat at gunpoint until he bursts, the greedy lawyer has to carve out a pound of his own flesh like in The Merchant of Venice, the slothful drug dealer is strapped to a bed and made to slowly waste away, the lustful prostitute gets boned to death by a guy wearing this, the proud narcissist has to choose between living disfigured or dying, and finally the hothead wrathful Mills kills the envious John Doe. Just as Dante's imaginative poetry made nebulous religious truths tangible and unforgettable, Doe uses contrapasso to bring medieval punishment to the modern world, to shock people's imagination and to lead them back to virtue. However, Doe's project isn't quite as righteous as Dante's, well, other than because he murders people, but also because there's an overwhelming contradiction.
Seems to me that you're overlooking a glaring contradiction.
At one point, Somerset jokes that John Doe could be Satan himself.
I mean, if he's Satan himself.
Well, turns out this is actually kind of the case, or more specifically, Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost. Another central work of Christian imagination, Paradise Lost is a 17th century epic poem that recounts the story of humanity's fall, centering on Satan's rebellion against God and his efforts to corrupt mankind. At the scene of the first murder, Somerset finds a quote from the text left by Doe.
Long is the way and hard that out of hell leads up to light.
It's from Milton.
With this line, Satan is acknowledging the difficulty of overcoming his self-imposed damnation, and Doe cites it to frame his murders as a harsh but necessary intervention to redeem a fallen world. There's something quite clever about this association of Doe with Satan. John Doe is trying to bring humans back to virtue, not corrupt them like Satan in Paradise Lost. So while he would likely identify himself with God in Milton's poem, he ironically embodies the very sin that defines Satan. Pride, the one that Pope Gregory deemed the root cause of all others, and that which leads Satan to reject divine authority and rebel against God. In the car ride scene leading up to the box,
What's in the box?
Somerset accuses Doe of taking a perverse enjoyment in his work.
Seems strange to me that you would get such enjoyment out of it. You enjoyed torturing those people.
If he were really an instrument of a higher power, he wouldn't revel in his acts, and if he were really a martyr, he wouldn't be so proud and hungry for recognition.
And what I've done is gonna be puzzled over and studied and followed forever.
So while he may paint himself as a prophet advancing a divine mission, he, like Satan, is ultimately driven by ego, not ennobling humanity. But despite the reality of his intentions, Doe's project does bring at least one person out of the darkness and into the light: Somerset. At the beginning, Somerset felt like a jaded bureaucrat.
We're collecting all the evidence, taking all the pictures and samples. That's all. That's all.
But through his pursuit of Doe and his connection with Mills, Somerset changes. He breaks the metronome, a symbol of his apathy, and decides to stay on the force.
I'll be around.
And while he maintains his cynical attitude about humanity, he nevertheless recommits to the fight for justice.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
This is what makes Seven such a darkly cynical reflection of our modern condition. Somerset's arc implicitly suggests that not only do we need to be shocked into moral action, but that shock needs to be a spectacle. Gone are the days when everyone gathered in pews to hear oral sermons or eagerly turned to allegorical literature for moral guidance. No, these days,
People don't want a champion. You want to eat cheeseburgers, play the lotto, and watch television.
Hey, how did you get like this?
Ultimately, the movie reveals that moral instruction is a question of fitting the message to the dominant medium of the era. Thus, John Doe designs his murders to create a macabre media frenzy, because people need a spectacle fitting a culture dominated by visual stimulation in order to capture their imagination. The film subtly gestures toward the ubiquity of media culture in the dialogue. Characters are always dropping media references.
Superco's gotta go.
Wake up, Glimmer Twins.
Just because the f***er's got a library card doesn't make him Yoda.
Charlie's f***ing angels.
Somebody phone Guinness. I think we got a record here.
And I suppose the movie itself is also evidence of this. The sordid mystery of the violent mastermind who enjoys mutilating people, shaves his fingertips, and fills 1,000 notebooks with psychotic drivel commands our attention and grips our imagination. If this is what it takes to fill the seats of a movie theater, then maybe it's also what it takes to compel moral reflection. Just as Somerset must reckon with the fact that Doe's horrific acts have actually changed him, we have to reckon with the notion that Mangione's horrific act has proven that we live in a world completely desensitized to ordinary forms of critique. It takes a valedictorian playboy writing book references on bullets and killing a CEO to reawaken public anger about injustice. Sure, these issues are often discussed, but words alone lack the visceral impact to provoke sustained outrage or inspire action. At one point in the film, Mills recounts witnessing a fellow officer killed in the line of duty. But despite that being the most dangerous event of his career, he can't remember the officer's name.
Christ, what's his name?
Because events and issues, even important ones, eventually fade away.
Well, you get numb after a while.
In Luigi's manifesto, he claims that the pharma companies have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public allows them to get away with it. John Doe, too, laments people's complacency as the root cause of moral decay.
We see a deadly sin on every street corner, and we tolerate it. We tolerate it because it's common.
And I think you can even interpret the metronome a second way, as not just Somerset tuning out society's problems, but as the constant hum of distractions that prevent us from feeling any sense of moral urgency. With Doe and Mangione, we have to confront the uncomfortable truth that ideas alone are perhaps not powerful enough to break through the inertia of our screen-saturated existence. Like Somerset, we're all easily lulled into apathy until someone comes along with a sledgehammer and rekindles our moral imagination.
Wanting people to listen, you can't just tap them on the shoulder anymore. You have to hit them with a sledgehammer.
Because the reality is, whether Doe or Mangione's righteousness is merely a facade hiding egotism is irrelevant. What creates meaning is the spectacle they create, not their intentions. But that's just part of the struggle of living in the age of spectacle, where we have to wrestle with both the repugnance of violent theatrics and its undeniable power over us. If Divine Comedy is a vivid rendering of the Christian imaginary, Seven is a cynical rendering of the modern secular imaginary, where only visceral, disturbing acts can penetrate our apathy and spark moral reflection. One of the final things Mills says to Doe is that he's no messiah, he's a movie of the week, a t-shirt at best.
You're no messiah. You're a movie of the week. You're a f***ing t-shirt at best.
But I suppose the question is, if it's the medium that determines what form moral messages can take and spectacle is a core architect of contemporary ethics, then is there really such a difference? Hey y'all, thanks for watching. Shout out again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment. It's a great way to stay informed and a great way to support the channel. Also be sure to subscribe. Next video is on Donnie Darko. Hope you guys are having a great new year, and I'll see you next time. Peace.